Ethan Caldwell stared at the security feed, his fingers trembling slightly above the pause button, his breath caught somewhere between disbelief and primal fear. The timestamp read 03 Parton 17 04 am. The feed was from a research station orbiting the edge of Gliesa 667 cc, a place so remote it didn't even have an official designation, just a string of letters and numbers only someone with top-level clearance would recognize. What Ethan saw wasn't just disturbing, it wasn't even horrific in the traditional sense, it was wrong, deeply, cosmically wrong. A woman, Dr. Layla Monroe, the lead linguist from the Apollo Concord Initiative, stood alone in an airlocked chamber facing the darkened viewport. Her back was rigid. The lights flickered once, and then she turned, whispering something too, low for the mic to catch. No one else was in the room, no one touched her, no environmental breach. But her body folded inward. Not collapsed, folded. Like the laws of matter had rewritten themselves just for her. And just before the feed scrambled into static, Ethan could swear he heard a child's voice, whispering his name in perfect Midwestern cadence. Ethan, it's your turn now. Now I know what you're thinking. This has to be a prank, a hoax file, a psychological trigger built by rogue AI systems for viral horror. You think that? Because your mind needs that explanation. But it's not. And if you're still watching, it means you've been chosen, not informed. This video wasn't meant to be found. It was buried inside a classified relay from an Earth-Mars jump-gate transmission, buried deep behind an encryption shell only someone like Ethan, or now you, would think to crack. And once you've seen it, you're part of it. Do you remember that strange blip last year? The 0.8-second blackout across every major observatory from New Mexico to Antarctica? The headline said, "Solar interference." Lies. That was the exact moment when contact was made, but not with a species. With something older. Not a civilization, but a memory encoded into dark matter, waiting dormant until the first human mind brushed against it. We didn't decode the message. The message decoded us. And then came the disappearances. Quiet. Precise. A child in Delaware who said the word Tellurian before vanishing in broad daylight on a school playground. A newborn in Nebraska opening his eyes and calmly uttering the phrase, "He remembers the war." And last month, in a sleepy town just outside Flagstaff, Arizona, an elderly man was found dead with his radio still playing the voice of his late wife, who had been buried for 15 years. She wasn't just speaking, she was warning. She said the name of a battle, one that hadn't happened yet. No, this isn't a ghost story. It's a war briefing, delivered in fragments, memories, glitches in reality. But the one constant, the one pattern Ethan found buried across all the footage, the audio logs, the madness, they all whispered the same haunting question, quietly, across languages and centuries, always in that same hollow tone. What happens when they remember who we are? You feel that chill crawling up your spine? That's your instincts catching up. Because the war that's coming isn't new. We've fought it before, but this time we're not accidentally joining it, we're returning to it. And as Ethan Sue steps off the secure channel and looks out into the void of space, he receives one final message, broadcast on a frequency so old it predates radio. A child's lullaby, warped and stretched, with one word spoken clearly in English, like it was meant just for him, and now, just for you. Welcome back. The screen flickers, a new file appears, and on it, your name is already typed in. Ethan blinked, the glow of the screen casting fractured shadows across his face as the lullaby looped again, slow, warped, like a distant radio transmission struggling to find clarity. His hand hovered over the mouse, but something pulled at him. A voice that wasn't quite his own whispering in the back of his mind, asking if this was truly happening, or if it was just another slip in a mind unraveling at the edges. The name flashing there, typed in crisp, undeniable letters, seemed less like a greeting and more like a sentence. Was this a message, a summons, Or a trap set by his own fraying nerves? He shook his head, trying to steady the racing pulse that thundered in his ears. The room around him felt too quiet, or maybe it was the kind of silence that had weight, the suffocating stillness that presses in on you after hearing something no one else can verify, something that doesn't fit inside the neat boxes labeled real or imagined. The lullaby crackled, the notes warping into a broken melody, and Ethan's eyes darted to the speakers. Were those static bursts just interference? Or was there something beneath, something coded? A second voice. Buried under the sound, his fingers trembled as he reached for the record of the research station, replaying the moments before Dr. Layla Monroe folded in on herself. But as the clip looped, subtle inconsistencies began to surface. The timestamp jumped back and forth, fractions of seconds slipping like sand through fingers. The woman's whispered words, once sharp and chilling, now sounded blurred, incoherent. The child's voice that had pierced the static, fainter, softer, sometimes replaced by an unidentifiable humming. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Was it a corrupted file, a deepfake, or worse, a fragment of a dream bleeding into his waking hours? His phone buzzed, snapping him out of the haze. The caller ID showed unknown, but the name etched in his mind, Teshurian, flared like a warning sign. With a gulp, he answered, the voice on the other end slow and deliberate, cloaked in a thick accent that twisted familiar words into riddles. You're not meant to see. Not yet. The line went dead, replaced by the sound of distant laughter, childlike but hollow, echoing like it bounced off cold metal walls. Ethan sat back, the chair creaking beneath him, sweat collecting. At the nape of his neck, memories flickered in and out of focus. Faces, names, places he was sure should be etched in his past but now felt like ghosts he couldn't quite grasp. Had he ever been to that research station? Had he ever met Layla Monroe? Or was it all a construction? An elaborate hallucination seeded by something in the dark corners of his mind. That's when she appeared. Mara, Ethan's oldest friend and the one person who claimed to understand the undercurrent of truths. They never want you to remember. Mara was a storm of contradictions. Brilliant yet unpredictable, grounded but drifting on the edge of her own unraveling. She slid into his cramped apartment without knocking, her eyes darting like a hunted animal's. You shouldn't have opened it, she whispered, dropping a crumpled recording onto his cluttered desk. The tape crackled as Ethan hit play. A man's voice emerged. Calm, clinical, but underneath something brittle, as if holding back a scream. Subject exhibits symptoms consistent with induced dissociative states. Memory gaps expanding. Reality perception deteriorating. Further, exposure not advised. The file ended abruptly, leaving a hollow space filled only by the hum of the old tape player. See? Mara said, her voice raw, like she'd been holding this secret inside for years. This isn't just about some cosmic war. It's about what they're doing to people like us. To you. It's the real unsolved mystery, why the memories fade, why we see things that shouldn't be there. The truth behind what no one tells you, and why they don't want you to remember. Ethan's stomach twisted, Mara's words carved into something buried deep. A fear that maybe the war, the disappearances, the cryptic messages weren't external threats, but fragments of a deeper unraveling. What if the veil between reality and madness was thinner than he dared imagine? What if the enemy wasn't out there in the stars, but inside the fragile corridors of his own mind? They sat in silence, the weight of unspoken horrors pressing down. As Ethan struggled to piece together what was real, the lullaby hummed faintly in the background, the notes looping again. But now, was that a whisper beneath it? A name? A warning? Or just the echo of a mind fighting to stay whole? Suddenly, Mara's eyes flickered with a shadow Ethan hadn't seen before, and she leaned closer, voice dropping to a breathless murmur. If you want to survive this, you have to decide which side of reality you're on. Because once you cross that line, there's no coming back. And just like that, the lights flickered. The room plunged into darkness. When they came back on, Ethan was alone. Ethan's breath hitched as dawn broke through the cracked blinds, spilling pale light. Over scattered notes, half-empty coffee cups, and the blinking cursor on his cracked laptop screen. For the first time in weeks, something felt different, clear. He had finally traced the fragments of the encrypted files, the whispered names, the disappearing timelines, back to something tangible. A forgotten government archive. Buried, under layers of classified dust. The documents were dense, fragmented transcripts from an old psychological experiment, something called Project Reverie. And in those brittle pages, the hidden truth was finally unfolding. It wasn't aliens. It wasn't cosmic wars or otherworldly invasions. It was us. Or more precisely, what they did to us, manipulating memories, implanting glitches in our perception to blur the line between past and present, reality and nightmare. Ethan's fingers trembled as he read the declassified report, a chilling account of volunteers subjected to experimental sensory deprivation, subliminal messaging, and psychotropic triggers designed to fracture consciousness. The goal, to test human resilience in the face of simulated trauma and alternate realities. But something went wrong, or maybe everything went exactly as planned. The echoes of those tests were alive in the now. His vanished friend Layla, the infant speaking impossible, Ames, the voice of the dead through a radio. They were all symptoms of the same fracture, a memory glitch spreading through the collective mind, bending time like a shattered mirror. The report claimed containment, an end to the project decades ago, but Ethan wasn't so sure. The patterns were too persistent, too personal. His phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't an unknown number. It was Mara, her voice crackling with something close to relief. "I found something," she said. "There's a connection between the disappearances and an old case from the 60s. Kids who vanished during a series of blackout events in small towns across the Midwest. They called it the silence. No bodies, no explanation, just gone." Ethan leaned back, heart pounding. The parallels were too stark to ignore. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was a recurrence. A cycle repeating itself, like a wound, that refused to heal. He pulled up faded newspaper clippings Mara had scanned, headlines screaming about children lost without a trace, authorities baffled, families shattered. The dates matched the timelines buried in the encrypted files, and then, almost as an afterthought, he noticed something else. A name, Caroline Harlow, a child from one of the earliest disappearances. A name he knew, because it was his mother's. The room seemed to tilt. Ethan's memories surged, half forgotten and hazy, like watching a home movie through fogged glass. His mother, a stern woman with kind eyes, telling him stories to keep nightmares at bay. Stories about shadows watching from corners, whispers, seeping through walls, and a fear that felt too deep to explain. He'd always chalked it up to childhood imagination, but now those stories felt like warnings, fragments of a hidden past coming back to reclaim him. Then the call came. No number, no voice, just a long, low hum that seemed to vibrate through his bones. It was familiar, and yet alien, like a lullaby, sung in a language his mind almost remembered but desperately wanted to forget. The hum grew louder, filling the room, distorting the air. Ethan clutched his head as memories crashed over him. His mother's disappearance, the blackout that swallowed her whole, the silence that followed. It wasn't just history, it was now. Mara's face appeared on the screen, eyes wide with something like fear, or maybe madness. "Ethan, listen. This isn't just a glitch or a memory. Something's been watching us from the start. It's been inside the silence, inside the gaps we can't explain. It's personal. It knows what you're afraid to remember." The screen flickered, the image twisting into something unrecognizable, then black. Ethan sat frozen, a cold dread pooling in his chest. He wanted to scream that he was done chasing ghosts, that he was just a man caught in a web of lies and fractured memories. But deep down, he knew it wasn't over. It never would be. And then, as if the universe itself was mocking him, Ethan's computer pinged with a new message, an old video file labeled simply, "Watch again." The truth wasn't just hidden, it was layered, buried beneath itself, waiting to trap anyone who dared seek it. And as Ethan stared into the blinking cursor, the lullaby started again. Warped, familiar, impossible to ignore. You're not crazy, they lied to you. And if you thought you understood the story until now, it was only because you hadn't yet learned the full extent of the silence between the notes. It was time to watch again. The moment Ethan hit play on the file labeled, "Watch Again," the room seemed to grow colder, the shadows deeper, as if the very air conspired to press closer, tightening around him like a vice. But he wasn't alone anymore, even if he felt painfully isolated. There were others out there. They had to be. The whispers buried in the static weren't just echoes in his mind, but part of a wider symphony of fractured voices that had been listening, watching, waiting. And now, as he watched the distorted images flicker across the screen, he realized the nightmare was no longer his to bear alone. For weeks, strange symbols began appearing on his devices, cryptic patterns of light and shadow in photos he never took, messages embedded deep inside videos he didn't recall downloading. The symbols weren't random. They were markers, coordinates, call signs meant to be recognized only by those who understood the silence between words. He started to see them in his dreams, too. Visions of places he'd never been, faces blurred but hauntingly familiar, a recurring motif of a fractured circle enclosing a broken star. It was a language of the lost, a code stitched together by fractured minds trying desperately to communicate across the void. It was Mara who finally made him confront the unthinkable. "You're not alone, Ethan," she said, voice low and urgent, eyes darting as if they were being watched even now. "Others are seeing this too. Others who remember what they never told you. We're connected by this shared fracture, this memory glitch. You were right all along. There's a network, silent, invisible, that's been watching the story unfold for decades. They watch from the shadows, feeding on the gaps in our minds." Her words echoed something Ethan had suspected, but was too terrified to admit. That the war, the disappearances, the cryptic lullabies weren't isolated incidents. They were symptoms of a slow, methodical unraveling of what it means to be human. Identity itself becoming fluid, slipping like water through his fingers. Who was he, really? Was Ethan Caldwell the man typing frantically in a cramped apartment on the edge of the city? Or was he a ghost among ghosts, a vessel for memories that weren't his own? And then, there was a new presence, an observer who appeared like a ghost in the digital haze. Their messages were rarer, cryptic but unmistakably deliberate. Fragments of found footage from 20 years ago, clips never released by the government, grainy recordings that seemed to bleed into the present with an eerie resonance. This observer didn't claim to be a hero or a savior. They positioned themselves as a witness, maybe the only one telling the truth amid the swirling chaos. "I've been watching," the messages said. "From the edges of everything you think you know. What you see is only the surface. What they never released hides deeper secrets, truths wrapped in lies stitched with silence. You've already stepped into their web. You can't turn back, but maybe, just maybe, you can see the threads." Each message felt like a shard of ice sliding under Ethan's skin, chilling but impossible to ignore. The observer's presence blurred the line further. Were they a guide or another manipulator? A fragment of Ethan's splintered mind, or an external force lurking in the digital shadows? The uncertainty gnawed at him, twisting reality into a maze without walls. As Ethan and Mara delved deeper, more patterns emerged, shared dreams that crossed continents, encrypted broadcasts slipping through obscure radio frequencies, glimpses of faces and places they couldn't place, but that felt intimately connected to their fragmented memories. It was a network of the unseen, a silent conspiracy that stretched beyond governments, beyond wars, beyond the fragile constructs of memory and identity. And somewhere within that vast, intangible web, a force watched, patient, unblinking, waiting for the moment when all fractures would align and reveal the truth hidden beneath layers of forgetting. It didn't speak in words. It didn't need to. It breathed in the spaces between thought and fear, in the tremors beneath waking life. It was the question no one dared ask, the shadow behind every forgotten face, the echo in every lost memory. Ethan's world spiraled deeper into uncertainty as the lines blurred between who he was, who he remembered, and who he was meant to become. The past wasn't past. The present wasn't certain. And the future, if there was one, was already watching him back. As the screen flickered once more, the observer's final message appeared, stark against the dark background. You've seen the surface. Now look beneath it. Watch again, because everything changes when the silence speaks. And in that moment, Ethan understood. This wasn't a story to be solved. It was a labyrinth to live inside. The watchful eyes weren't waiting for him to escape. They were waiting for him to join them. Ethan sat alone in the dim glow of his cluttered apartment, the soft hum of his computer, the only sound piercing the heavy silence. The fractured images on his screen blurred, flickering between fragments, of forgotten memories and cryptic messages from that unseen observer, who was no longer just a voice from the shadows, but an echo inside his own mind. The question no longer was, what had happened? That had become a tangled web of possibilities and lies. But why it had happened, and what it meant to be caught in its vast, unyielding grasp. He felt the weight of that question press deep into his chest, heavier than any fear or confusion he had known before, because beneath the veil of lost children, vanished friends, and whispered names, beneath the glitching reality and spectral lullabies, lay a truth so raw it threatened to unravel not just his understanding of the world, but his very self. What if this was never about external enemies or shadow governments? What if this was about something more intimate, more human, the fragility of memory, the desperation for connection, the terrible loneliness that gnaws at the edges of identity? The observer's latest message blinked on the screen, a single line that burned into Ethan's soul. The fractures are us. We are the silence they never wanted to hear. Those words weren't just cryptic code. They were a mirror held up to his own shattered reflection. Every lost memory, every inexplicable disappearance, every vanished face was a fragment of human fear and pain, splintered across time and space. And Ethan realized with a painful clarity that to confront the truth was to confront himself, his fears, his losses, his desperate need to be seen and remembered. A sudden wave of vulnerability crashed over him as he thought of Mara, whose steady voice had been a lifeline through the chaos. Her confession had come like a whisper in a storm, fragile but unyielding. I lost someone too, someone I thought was real, until the silence swallowed them whole. We're not broken, we're fractured, like everyone else. And maybe that's what it means to be human. That moment broke something open in Ethan. It wasn't just a mystery anymore, it was a reckoning. The fractures weren't just errors or glitches. They were scars of survival, echoes of trauma we all carry but rarely admit. The truth, if he could bear it, might destroy him, or it might finally set him free. But there was no turning back. Not now. As the night deepened, Ethan faced a choice: to dive into the heart of the silence, embracing the terrifying possibility that his memories, his very identity, were constructs, fluid, fragile, and endlessly rewritable, or to retreat into the comforting lies of certainty, to pretend the fractures didn't exist, that the ghosts in the static were just echoes of a broken past. He hesitated, the weight of that choice crushing and infinite, until he whispered to the darkened room, maybe the silence isn't the enemy. Maybe it's the last truth left when everything else has been taken away. The computer screen flickered once more, the glow illuminating a haunting final message from the observer. Wake up, Ethan. The dream you thought you lived was never yours alone, and the silence, it remembers. In that electric moment, the lines between waking and dreaming shattered, and Ethan realized he was not just a character in a story, but a living fracture in a far greater whole. one where truth and illusion wove into a tapestry too vast to ever fully comprehend. He was awake now, but the awakening was only the beginning, and as the screen dimmed to black, a single thought lingered, heavy and unyielding. What if the real question isn't what we lose, but what we choose to remember? Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for stories you were never meant to hear. Until next time, remember, some truths don't want to be found.